it's not just a dip, it's a structural amputation. The mainstream media is still trying to call this volatility, but they're lying to you. The DXY is hemorrhaging 6% of its lifeblood because we finally crossed the Rubicon. We've traded the global reserve status for a protectionist war chest. You look at the euro sitting at $1.17 right now, and you realize the king dollar era didn't just end, it was executed. The math is breaking. It's absolutely breaking. We're being told that this is managed reciprocity, a fancy term for a 104% tariff wall against China and a 10% baseline tax on the rest of the planet. But look at the friction. Look at the raw mechanics. The National Retail Federation is scream-shouting into the void about a 20% collapse in imports for the back half of this year. 20%. That isn't a slowdown. That's a heart attack in the global supply chain. If you think your local big box store is going to absorb a 104% tax on electronics or a 10% levy on everything else, you're delusional. They're bleeding out, and the only way they survive is by taking the money out of your wallet before you even realize it's gone. The official statement from the Fed tries to sound calm, but their actions are frantic. They're trapped in a policy nightmare, stuck between a tariff-induced recession and a dollar that's losing its grip on the throat of global trade. We've seen $250 billion in tariff revenue flood the Treasury this year alone. It's a boom for the government, but a total doom scenario for anyone holding cash.
Why does this matter to you? Because the dollar's value isn't just a number on a screen. It's your purchasing power. It's the reason your grocery bill has surged while the experts tell you inflation is under control. It's under control for them because they're the ones collecting the $30 billion a month in reciprocal fees. For you, it's a tax on existence. We are watching the purposeful devaluation of the American greenback to fund a trade war that has no exit strategy. The trajectory is undeniable. We are moving toward a 2026 where safety is a memory and cash is a liability. But here's the thing they aren't telling you. There is a mechanism behind this crash, a deliberate, calculated pivot that changes the rules of the game for the next decade. If you think this ends with a simple market correction, you haven't seen what's coming next in the reciprocal playbook. To understand why the dollar is currently gasping for air, you have to look back at the shrapnel from April 2nd, what the administration called Liberation Day. That was the moment the floor fell out. It wasn't just a policy shift. It was a total demolition of the post-1945 trade order. The standard argument you'll hear from the talking heads is that these tariffs are meant to bring factories home, to reindustrialize America. It's a lie. It's a mathematical impossibility. You can't rebuild a 30-year-old global supply chain in 8 months. It's like trying to rebuild a Boeing 747 while it's mid-dive at 30,000 feet. The reality? This isn't about manufacturing. It's about a $250 billion revenue grab by the Treasury. The villain in this story depends on who you ask, but the data points to a collision between two unmovable objects, Trump's reciprocal tariff doctrine and Jerome Powell's absolute paralysis at the Fed. Trump signed the executive orders using the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, declaring the trade deficit a national emergency. That was the trigger for the 104% China Wall. Let's break that number down because it sounds fake, but the ledger doesn't lie. You've got the 10% global baseline, a 20% fentanyl levy, and a 74% reciprocal adjustment. It's a punitive strike, plain and simple. But here is where the straw man falls apart. The administration thought the world would just roll over and pay. Instead, they fought back. The EU didn't just write a check. They moved toward the euro as a stable alternative, which is why we're staring at a $1.17 exchange rate today. When the dollar weakens like this, it's not just a red line on a chart. It's a silent, invisible tax. Think about it. When that index drops 6%, your purchasing power doesn't just dip, it evaporates. The
The data from the Penn-Wharton budget model is chilling. The average American household is looking at a $1,300 tax hike this year alone, just to keep the same lifestyle they had in 2024. That's $1,300 sucked out of the economy and handed to the government, all while the mainstream narrative tells you revenues are up. And where is Powell? He's trapped. If he raises rates to save the dollar, he crushes the stock market, which is already reeling from the April crash. If he cuts rates to save the economy, the dollar sinks even further. He's chosen to stand still while the house burns. The easy fix they keep promising, that these tariffs will force China to the table, is a fantasy. Beijing isn't blinking. They've already pivoted their rare earth exports, strangling our tech manufacturing before it can even start. We're not winning a trade war. We're funding our own obsolescence. The failure isn't in the policy, it's in the physics of the system. You've heard the term king dollar for decades, but you have to understand the mechanics of the throne. The throne was built on one thing: liquidity. The world used dollars because they were everywhere, they were easy to move, and they were the neutral lubricant of global trade. But on April 2nd, we didn't just add a tax, we added grit to the gears. Imagine a high-performance racing engine. For 80 years, this engine, the US dollar, has been running on pure, high-octane global trust. It's the fastest, most reliable machine in history. But suddenly, the driver, the administration, decides that the engine is leaking too much oil to other countries. So they decide to plug the exhaust pipes with reciprocal tariffs. They think they're keeping the power inside, but anyone who knows mechanics understands what happens next. The pressure builds up, the heat spikes, the engine starts to knock, and then the driver decides to fix the heat by spraying nitrous oxide, that's the $250 billion in tariff revenue, directly into the intake to keep the speed up. For a second, the car surges. That's the boom in the Treasury's tax collection. But the structural integrity is failing. The 6% plummet in the DXY is the sound of the gaskets blowing. You can't have a global reserve currency that is also a weapon of isolation. It's a physical contradiction. When you tell the world they have to pay a 104% entry fee to use your currency, they don't just pay it, they find a different engine. I know, it sounds impossible. We've lived under the dollar's shadow our entire lives, but the pattern is screaming at us. The empathy trap here is actually the most terrifying part. Look at Powell and Trump. They aren't evil in a comic book sense, they are mathematically cornered. Trump is trapped by his promise to replace income tax with tariffs, a promise that requires import volumes to stay high. But the NRF data shows volumes are cratering by 20%. He's losing his tax base as fast as he's building it. Meanwhile, Powell is trapped by the ghost of 1970s stagflation. He can't save the dollar without killing the American consumer, and he can't save the consumer without letting the dollar slide into the abyss. They are two pilots fighting over the controls while the plane is in a flat spin. This is the domino effect in real time. The trigger, the 104% China wall, makes imports too expensive. The friction, retailers like Walmart and Target stop ordering. That's your 20% NRF drop. The devaluation, with fewer goods coming in, there's less demand for dollars to pay for them. The world starts dumping their greenback reserves to buy euros and gold. The crash, the dollar index breaks through the 98-point floor, hitting a 12-week low on its way to a full-blown 2026 recession. The mainstream narrative says this is a negotiating tactic. The math says it's a controlled demolition that's spinning out of control. The ugly truth is that we are no longer waiting for a crash, we are living in the debris of one. As we cross into 2026, the statistical models from JP Morgan and Yale's Budget Lab are flashing a 35% probability of a full-blown recession, but even that feels optimistic. The reality is stagflation light. We are entering a cycle where growth is anemic, struggling to hit 2%, while the core PCE inflation is pinned at a sticky 3%. The math of the Trump tariff windfall is finally being reconciled, and the cost is being billed directly to your doorstep. For every dollar the Treasury collects in reciprocal revenue, the average American household is losing approximately $1,700 in real annual income. This isn't a theoretical loss, it's the 14 to 20% price hike on your shoes, your electrical equipment, and your car. It's the China Wall tax manifesting as a permanent reduction in your standard of living. By mid-2026, the vision of our society will be one of deep fragmentation. We are moving toward a balkanized global economy where free trade is a relic of the 20th century. The dollar is no longer the undisputed king, it's a regional power competing with a euro that's found its backbone at $1.17 and a gold market that is systematically replacing fiat reserves. Central banks aren't just talking about de-dollarization anymore. They are holding 20% of their foreign exchange in gold. They are preparing for a world where the greenback is a liability. So what is the life advice? How do you survive the boom and doom era? First, you have to accept that the old 60-40 portfolio is dead. In a high-tariff, high-inflation world, safe bonds are just a slow way to go broke. The institutions are already moving. Gold targets for late 2026 are hitting $5,000 an ounce, and silver is in a price discovery surge towards $65. You need to stop thinking like a consumer and start thinking like a central bank. Diversify into hard assets that the government can't devalue with a reciprocal pen stroke. Second, mental fortitude is your only real currency. The 2026 landscape will be noisy, filled with political theater, Supreme Court rulings on the legality of the IEEPA, and constant pivots from a Fed that doesn't know which fire to put out first. Don't get caught in the eye magnet hysteria of the news cycle. Focus on your local community and your personal liquidity. When the macroeconomy becomes a rigged casino, your microeconomy, your skills, your network, and your debt-free assets is your only sanctuary. The shift is permanent. The king dollar era didn't end because we were weak. It ended because we chose to change the rules of the game. We are now playing a game of managed survival. Trust the patterns, not the promises. The patterns say the dollar is resetting. The promises say everything is fine. You know which one to follow. I'll see you in the comments.